Hi everyone, welcome back to my videos. I am now 33 weeks pregnant and I am definitely feeling it. So today I am going to talk to you about my C-section experience. Apologies already in advance if it's a slightly longer video than normal. But I thought that since I've seen the consultant recently and we may have to discuss another planned C-section again, then I thought this would be a good time to do it. I think it's been about 24-25 degrees and it's been nothing but beautiful sunshine all day, which has been lovely, and it means that I've just felt so good about myself that, as you can see, I've made an effort. I've actually done my hair, put a little bit of makeup on. I still haven't touched my eyebrows, but then it's still lockdowns. So I had a scan in the hospital about just under 3 weeks ago, and this is because my PAP-A level is low. And just a bit of a reminder, low PAP-A means I can have a small baby and a preterm labour. So the moment they found out that I had low PAP-A, they booked me in for two extra growth scans. So I went for that when I was about 30 weeks pregnant. Other than the fact that it was lockdown and my husband couldn't come with me, which was a shame again, I had a midwife who was also trained up to be a sonographer, which was lovely. But the midwife made it about the baby and got all excited about all the baby bits and took some wonderful photographs. They even took a photograph of the baby with his eye open, which was insane. Just to look at it, it's really strange. At the time, baby was breech again, haha. So as I already might have discussed, and what I'm going to discuss today is the fact that breech is a little bit of a problem because my previous little girl was breech, which meant we had to have a planned C-section. And the consultant said at the time, at 30 weeks pregnant, it's not a big deal because it's, you know, there's plenty of time for the baby to turn. However, because I've had a breech baby before, there is a small chance that the baby might not turn. We discussed at the time that if baby does turn and we, gets in the right position and I'm able to have a natural labour, I am going for something called a VBAC, which is a vaginal birth after C-section. So that's the plan. That's the plan anyway, as long as baby decides to turn. If the baby doesn't decide to turn, then we'll just go back to having a planned C-section again. We briefly discussed about having the baby turned, but she said because I've got a C-section scar, having the baby manipulated and turned means that you have a lot more risk on the scar. So she said you're going to be hard pressed to find a consultant who will actually be willing to do that. So I thought, fine, if the baby's still breech, we'll go for a planned C-section. So this is Bump at 33 weeks. Oh my God, it looks even bigger when you put it on camera. But yeah, definitely getting big now, and baby is deciding to wiggle and move and do an Irish jig every 5 minutes, regardless of the situation. One of the reasons why I'm making a whole video just on the C-section alone is because when I was having a planned C-section, I couldn't find very much personal experience information on a planned C-section. Hopefully this will help anyone who's going through a similar situation that is a bit concerned about having planned C-section. So my planned C-section experience, looking back, was a positive one. But at the time I realised I had a breech baby. Her head was sort of here, her bum was here, and her legs were here. So she was properly, folded in a V, and I tried everything. I tried handstands in the pool, I tried to lie upside down on an ironing board against my sofa. I did everything and she was mad moving. So we were up and down about whether to have something called an ECV, which is called an external cephalic version, I think, off the top of my head. But don't quote me on that, and I'm not going to say it again. So it's just ECV from now on. The more we looked into it and the more we kind of thought about it, in the end we just thought it was a better idea not to attempt something like that. The consultant that we spoke to at the time basically said if anything goes wrong, with the baby, or the baby ends up going into distress halfway through the procedure, it means I could end up having an emergency C-section under general anaesthetic, which means I would be knocked out and my husband would have to be in another room. And I was really upset because I really wanted to have a natural birth. I'd gone through all the antenatal classes, I learned all the stuff, and I was just really excited about being able to go into natural labour and going through that experience, you know, especially after carrying a baby for 9 months. It's a bit of you go through a bit of mental turmoil through it all. You really want what's best for you and the baby, but at the same time you've got an idea of what you had planned and the vision of bringing this little baby into the world. But looking back now, it was the best decision that we could have made, and I'm really, really happy that we went for a planned C-section. After I spoke to the consultant, we booked my planned C-section at 39 weeks. So it actually ended up being 5 days before my due date, roughly 39 weeks. And it means I actually didn't go into labour. So what can happen is that although you've got a planned C-section book, you might go into labour naturally before that actually happens, but then the exactly same process happens. You just go into hospital, but instead of a planned C-section, it then becomes an emergency C-section because your body's already starting to labour. So they have to treat it as an emergency C-section. We had a date in the diary. I think we only told my mum. I don't think we told anyone else the date because we didn't want to. We wanted to still be able to reveal it as a surprise on the day. We got to go for a meal the night before, so we went to a local restaurant and I had a little glass of wine, and we just laughed and talked and chilled out, and I think both of us were so nervous. It was just better to get out of the house and not think about it, because it's one thing to go into natural labour and not really know when it's going to happen, but when you've got an actual date that you need to go in hospital to have a baby taken out, it gets you nervous. So we decided to leave the house, as I said, go to a restaurant, have a nice meal. It was lovely. I got to go to sleep and have a full night's sleep. I mean, as upset as I was to not have a natural labour, it was actually great. So I really can't complain. When I saw the consultant beforehand, she gave me 2 tablets to take. One is called omeprazole, and that is to control the acid in your stomach. And I had to take that the night before the C-section. So I took it around 10 o'clock. So the second tablet they gave me was something called metoclopramide, which basically makes sure you're not sick during the surgery. So I had to take that around 6, half 6 the next morning, and they allowed you to have a bit of toast, one bit of toast and a cup of tea or a coffee, whatever you want, the next morning, and that was it. You're not allowed to eat anymore because obviously you're going to go into an operation. So those were the 2 tablets I had to take, one the night before, one in the morning. I had to set my alarm at 6, take that and have my toast. They said ordinarily they would like you to come in at 7 a.m. but they said, give us a ring first because anything might happen. Obviously, you might have women already in having emergency C-sections, which means you might be bumped down the list slightly. But I was still going in that day regardless. So I rang up at 7 and they told me to not come in until 9, half 9 off the top of my head. So that was fine. Got to bimble around the house, go back to sleep for a little bit, which was great. This particular hospital that I had my daughter in had 2 floors. There was the area that you had all the operations in, the operations ward bit, and then you go upstairs to the recovery wards. So we went to the lower level where the surgery takes place, and we were put into a room. We brought all our bags into that room. We went all there. We were greeted by a midwife who explained everything, and she had to check whether I had shaved. So if you have a planned C-section, you've got to shave your pubic region within 3 days of you having the surgery. So she had to check all that. I had to change into a hospital gown, and I basically had to wait there until it was my turn. they book 3 elective C-sections in this hospital per day, and they book them all in at the same time and then just see what the situation is. As it was, one of the women that was part of the planned C-section had already had the baby because she went into labour before, but there was an emergency C-section that had just arrived when we arrived at hospital. So we had to wait for that one to go. Then the lady who was in the room with me, with her husband, who was also part of the planned C-section little group, she then went next. So actually it wasn't until about 4:30 in the afternoon that I finally got my turn. There was a lot of waiting around. I wasn't allowed to eat, obviously, so all I was allowed was a few sips of water occasionally, so just to keep myself going. Loads of books, watching things on my phone, you know, it was just a lot of waiting around. You couldn't move, other than to go to the toilet, you couldn't move from the room because I had the flappy hospital gown on and everything, so you didn't even particularly want to go too far. When it was my chance to go, they took me into the surgery room, and my husband stayed back in the sort of recovery room, which was next door. And speaking to him after, he said it was the longest 10-15 minutes of his life. He said literally every minute was just ticking away and he was just so nervous. But the reason why is because they needed me to go next door to have my spinal block. And a spinal block is basically like a local anaesthetic that they put in your spine. It's slightly different to an epidural because you just have one dose and it just knocks everything out in one fell swoop. So I sat on the bed and the anaesthetist was behind me. And you'll be surprised how many people are in the room at this point. I'm not going to describe everyone because I couldn't tell you anyway. So I had to sit on the bed with my legs over the side, and I had to bend forward, and I wasn't allowed to move. And then they said, right, okay, we're going in. And I think at this point you're thinking, oh God, please let everything go okay. Because it is quite nerve-wracking, especially when your husband's in the next room. And they had a go at doing the spinal block once and it didn't work. So they had an extra go. And I wouldn't describe it as painful, if my memory serves. I would say it's uncomfortable. They don't obviously hit your nerve. They put local anaesthetic around your nerve, which then knocks out the nerve. So all of a sudden you feel this really strange warm sensation that's just spreads down your legs. It's a very odd sensation. But then they lie you down, so they move you around, make sure you're comfortable. And it was around about that time that my husband came in the room as well. I had the anaesthetist around my head, so he was actually, like, I was lying down, he was directly behind me, and I think that he was both checking me for vital signs, making sure I wasn't, you know, fainting or my blood pressure wasn't going too low, and also making sure that I, you know, needed a top up if needed. Yeah, so that lasted for about 10 minutes, and then they started testing all up and down my body, and I actually couldn't feel from about just at the bottom of my ribs down. I couldn't feel any of that. At this point, they put a catheter in. So remember that obviously if you can't feel that you need a wee, you've got to have a catheter to, you know, collect your wee. The room was, I remember Cause on the radio was going on at the time, which makes me laugh because I actually love the Cause. After they've tested me, made sure that everything was numb and I couldn't feel anything, they put a screen up. So from about, yeah, again, about from my ribs up, so all I could see was a screen. That's when the actual operation started. Obviously I couldn't feel anything, but what they have to do is, I suppose, to try and make sure the scar is as small as possible, they make a little hole that's just sort of at your pubic line. So if you wore some really skimpy bikini, it's around there. But if you wore normal bikini bottoms, actually you can't see your scar at all. Like it's really low, which is great. It's about that big. Your scar's about that big, maybe that big. And obviously it would depend on each person and babies and bodies and things like that. But what they have to do, once they've made the opening, is that they have to squeeze the baby out. So what they have to do is they have to push from the top of your bump and almost squeeze it out like a sachet of ketchup. So they put all the pressure at the top and squeeze your stomach down. And despite you not being able to feel pain, that sensation was horrendous. It's not nice. It's like you've got someone putting their whole body weight all through your stomach. And I think that was probably the worst part. And they have to do it in different angles to try and get the baby out in different ways. And remember, the baby, in my case, was folded like a V. So she came out bum first. So they had to try and manipulate her to try and get her out in the smallest, tightest cut that they made possible. But the thing that I remember the most was this sudden feeling of cold. I remember feeling all of a sudden very, very cold, like my teeth were chattering cold. And it wasn't until after that I realised that it was because I had lost so much blood. So my blood pressure was dropping really, really quickly. As it was, thankfully, I didn't need a transfusion or anything. They just kept an eye on me. They kept an eye on my vitals and everything was fine. I just felt freezing cold all of a sudden. But the anaesthetist, who was sort of up around my head, he kept asking me, am I okay? How am I feeling? He kept talking me through it. And obviously my husband was there, so he was just floating around my head as well. So that was quite nice. And he was holding my hand and we were chatting and talking about the music. And, you know, that's kind of the, you know, how chilled out it was. It was quite nice. And then obviously we heard a cry about 5 minutes later, and then she was out. They lifted her over, which is quite funny. They kind of lifted her over the screen and sort of showed us. But because we didn't know what we were having, I couldn't see. Her legs were folded. So I was like, what is it? What is it? Like, is it a boy? Is it a girl? Like, I just said, what is it? It was my husband who turned around and said, oh my God, it's a girl. And I was shocked. I was so shocked. I was so convinced I was having a boy. So they asked my husband if they wanted to see her being weighed, and he did, and he went over the other side of the room, and he said afterwards, he said he as he turned around, he looked in his peripheral vision and caught a glimpse of the war zone that was my lower half, and he said there was just blood everywhere, and I was like, oh my God. Well, they stuck her onto me for a couple of minutes, and then they asked my husband to go back into the recovery room, and then the midwife took her and handed her to my husband in the recovery room, where they had skin on skin. So my husband took his top off, they had skin on skin, which was lovely, while they stitched me up. So that didn't take long at all about it. And then they wheeled me back into the recovery room, where they propped me up, and I got to cuddle her for the first time. The midwife comes and stays with you then and make sure you're okay, you know, practice latching if you're planning on breastfeeding, making sure I was feeling okay. And then once, you know, wrapped baby up, put a little hat on her, made sure I was okay, they wheeled me up to the normal wards where women recover to have their babies. Yeah, so all our bags came with us, my husband came with us, and by this point it was about 5:30 in the evening. So my husband got to stay with me for a few hours, which was nice. I'm going to talk about, obviously, hospital stays and wards and, you know, everything gone on there. I'm going to talk about that in my next video. So I'm not going to delve in that now, but this is just about the C-section. But overall, my experience was a really, really positive one. So if anyone's going through a bit of a turmoil of what to do and how to have it and everything like that, I wouldn't shy away from having one. And similarly for this one, as much as I want a natural labour, if they turn around to me and say, no, you need to have a planned C-section again, I'm not going to break my heart over it because I had such a positive experience. Labour and how the baby comes out is such a tiny, tiny part of having a baby and having a child and bringing up a child. You just have to roll with it. And if you happen to have a chance to have a successful ECV, then great, to have the baby turned. But if you can't, like me, and you know there is other complications, and you just decide not to, then a planned C-section is it can be a really positive thing. So that's my video on a planned C-section. Sorry it's a bit long. As I said, next time I'm going to talk about my recovery on the maternity ward and how I found that experience. And obviously I had a planned C-section, so that added to complications. It's not like I had natural labour, so that added to a few extra things. So I'll be talking all about that next time. But yeah, see you soon. Bye.